Welcome to Real Love Guitars, and here we are with Dominic's very handsome Pelham Blue Epiphone 339, the slightly smaller bodied semi-acoustic guitar. Semi-acoustic, yeah, semi-acoustic guitar. That is sort of, well, I don't know, it's a beautiful looking thing, and I find this is the perfect sort of combination for the people who like semi-acoustic but don't want the great big flat 335 type size thingy. So this is in for a setup, and setup it shall get. Sorry, my cable's in the way. So what we've got on here is we have double binding, and that kind of got me at that every time. I love, ooh, I'm gonna have to unplug this. I love a double bound thing. I'm a sucker for that. We've got what looks like a, well, it kind of looks like a Tusqish sort of nut, but I have a feeling it might be new bone. We'll see. It might be Tusq actually. That's cool. The action isn't bad at all on there. If I can show you roughly. Not bad. Can't see the shadows very well. Yeah, it's pretty good. Maybe tiny tweak. But we've got decent action, probably a decent nut, although yeah, actually I'm not too unhappy with that. But we're going to fit an adjustable one on anyway, and here it is. Oh, here it is up here where I put it, and here's strings to go on this. We're going to fit 9s, and we're going to give it a good all-round setup. And look at that finish, isn't it pretty? And set as low an action as possible, and just make it even more lovely than it already is, which is kind of hard because it's pretty lovely. I had a little play of this the other evening when it first came in, and I likes it muchly. Sorry about the flickering. Hopefully in not too distant future I might be able to do something to overcome that, i.e. switch to an iPhone 12 at some point. You never know. That's probably a weak spot here, although I don't know, depending on the way the wood is in here. It's certainly a weak spot on acoustic guitars, but that's because they're very thin-sided. This is probably a lot chunkier. It might even be a solid tunnel. But yeah, so it might not be a weak spot at all, but it's a beautiful guitar, the ES339 Epiphone. I've set up quite a number of these, and they seem to go great with the adjustable nut. Frets on this are plenty of life in them. This isn't a new guitar. You can see some evidence of some work here and there, some grime on the fingerboard, and some evidence of it being cleaned in different ways. So what I'm going to do, after having done that close-up run, oops, got two separate videos now. Right, I'm going to, I don't know how, let's put this on the stand and let's just get this recording. What I'm concerned about is the battery is not the greatest on this at the moment, but let's see how far we get. And if we run out, we can always revert to the good old Sony action cam. So I'm going to just run it like this. We're going to go video and just let it run. And if it conks out, we've always got Paris. All right. So what are we going to do? We're going to take off the truss rod cover, which is always what we need to do because we may need to make an adjustment, but we certainly need to get the original nut off and get do that. It helps to have the cover off. So we'll take it off right now, and oh, sorry, I just booted the camera. First time I've put the camera down this end, so I may periodically check it. I mean, you know, we're seeing the kind of nut end of things, which is probably the more, I don't know how to get this, sorry, I'm going to drag this in a bit more. The nut end of things is probably a bit more sort of relevant to what's going on. Stay there, please. Thank you. Anyway, okay, so let's do a couple of things. Let's check and just get a feel for the first fret action as it is, and I'll make some notes on the board so we so we know as we go. But I think it's pretty good. I reckon it's about 0.4. So almost exactly 0.3, 0.4, 0.3.5, 0.3. Well, that's good. We're going to remove that anyway and replace it with this little number here, the custom-made adjustable Tusq nut. The reason for this, the good thing about this, is this gives you an opportunity to set the perfect first fret action, but it also allows you to adjust it as the name suggests. And what that means is if you want to play it as low and light as you possibly can get it, you can do that and see how it plays. And if you want to take it up a tiny bit, raise it up, and you can experiment. That's the good thing to begin with. These frets are quite sharp. I need to soften these off. God, they are sharp actually. Yeah, so you can adjust it, and also if you wanted to play slide, you could actually raise it up quite a lot and potentially use it to play slide as well without having to put a separate nut in, which I think is quite cool. So yeah, so we've got a good, decent first fret action. We're going to mess all of that up. Now, you know, if we hadn't already agreed on this, it wouldn't necessarily be something you'd need to do. In this case, the nut looks like a decent quality material, but it's hard to know, and I haven't heard yet any problems tuning with that nut. So good old Epiphone there, they seem to be putting a decent nut in these days. They're very tall, the Epiphone nuts, which makes replacing them, can't just put a Les Paul nut in there. You have to get the Epiphone brand or Epiphone specific model. These frets are a bit sharp, so I'm going to have to do some work, and maybe we have to do some work with a little file, because it's a bit of what feels like fret sprout, which may be the fact that the guitar or the fingerboard has shrunk over time a little bit, and we just have the kind of sharp edge of the beveled part just becoming perceptible with one's fingers. Okay, so that's cool. Let's have a look at the relief on this guitar at the moment, and we'll just sort of hold it down. That's about, I would say it's about 0.2, but I will get a capo and we'll see if we can get as near to being sure of that as possible. Again, the old story about why, you know, what does it matter, or how much relief should you have, and what's the rule of thumb? And there is no hard and fast rule. The bottom line is your strings need somewhere to spin, some room to spin, and if they don't have that room, they will, that's 0.2, so it's more than that. If they don't have that room, they will risk clattering onto the fingerboard or the frets, not fingerboard, on the frets. And I call that fret slap, when the strings kind of connect with the frets as they're trying to play. Okay, so it's nearly 0.4, so it's possibly a little higher than it needs to be. Now, the question here is, do we know it's higher than it needs to be, or are we just guessing? Well, we're kind of guessing, right? Because it needs to be more than nothing. That's the first thing. So if you have, that's not even strictly true. You can have a completely flat neck, and many guitarists do, but in order for that to play without this fret slap, where the wavering, spinning, floppering strings hit the frets, if you're going to have a very flat neck, you have to potentially, well, you have to certainly have your frets very level, and then you may actually be forced to have a slightly higher action at both ends, or certainly at the bridge end. So the strings need some room to move, and if you hit them harder, if you're a kind of a forceful player, they're going to need even more room. So there comes a point at which you can't have all your cakes and eat it. I know we've got used to that in this country at the moment, but if you are a heavy hitter and you like a flat neck with very little relief, keep my fire going, you're going to have to raise the action. if you're a heavy hitter and you don't mind, you're not particularly attached to a flat neck, you can keep a lower action, but you can put a bit more relief into the neck to allow the strings room in the middle to spin. So it's a play-off between all of those things, and all you really need to have a sense of is how they interact and interrelate those variables, right? And I talk about, when I talk about the action, I talk about three primary things. I talk about the neck relief, the first fret action, and what I call the last fret action. People measure it in different places. I'm perfectly happy measuring it here. To me, it's primarily adjusted by the bridge, but I measure it here because it's the last fret in the series. But for me, it's the neck relief, the first fret action, i.e. how the nut slots are cut, and the last fret action, i.e. how the bridge is adjusted, or the saddles. Those three things are kind of three key variables. A fourth one I don't sort of list, but is critically important, as I've said, is the way you strike the strings. Now, if I hit them very hard, you will always get that fret slap or clatter. Okay? The only way you're not going to have that is if you don't hit it so hard, or if the action is way higher to allow the string up here where it's doing the clattering to spin without in danger of coming near the fret. There's no magical way around it. There's no magical bullet or pill you can take to have low action, flat profile, and still be able to hit it really hard without getting that fret slap. So all of this setup thing is a combination of of some of those key variables: neck relief, first fret action, last fret action, and the ones you have control about and you know better than me, which is how you hit the strings. Now, when I do a setup, I do it to the lowest possible action, assuming for a sort of medium strength, sitting at home jamming style. Now, if you're going to be out playing in a pub or on stage or whatever, you might hit the thing harder, in which case you may find that you want to raise the action very slightly from where I've set it. But I set it and level the frets for a very low action. But it's the lowest it will go. Any lower than that, and I won't have leveled the frets below the level of that baseline action, right? And some people say, that's ridiculously low, nobody plays with an action. Well, actually quite a lot of people do, and they can go up from it if they prefer, but I like to get the frets level for a low action to begin with at both ends. The advantages the advantages are, if it's low at this end, you avoid the notes being played down here going sharp, which you get if the first fret action is higher than about 0.5 millimeter. Any higher than that, fretted notes near the nut go sharp and it spoils your chords. It makes them sound like that. Now I'm squeezing the hell out of it to get the effect, but that sort of sharp on the fretted notes, true on the unfretted notes, and the hellish din they make when struck together, that's very common when you have a high first fret action, because the height over the first fret forces, to even fret it, forces you to bend the strings. You have to press them with such force they push the notes sharp. So a low action at the first fret gets rid of that likelihood of those fretted notes going sharp. So that makes your chords down here suddenly true and very beautiful sounding. But on top of that, it makes it incredibly light to the touch. So you can play your bar chords and all your cowboy chords with hardly any pressure at all. And until you've had this set really low down here and nicely set, you won't know how much of an improvement that is. Some people may not like it. If you've been playing difficult to play guitars for 40 years, you might find this effortless area down here. Suddenly it might feel to you like there's no resistance. You might just not be comfortable. So, you know, you have to be realistic. Of course, that allows you, adjustable, that allows you to push it back up a little bit to where you may prefer it. But again, I start with the lowest feasible or reasonable action to make this light, easy to play with, and avoid those notes going sharp. That's the benefit of getting a low first fret action. At the same time as getting the low first fret action by either fitting an adjustable Tusq nut or cutting the slots here properly, what we get is a nut that allows the strings to pass through without friction, and that removing friction by having the best material possible and the best cut slots possible. Removing that friction is 50% of your tuning stability equation. If you just get that right and you stretch your strings out, you will have guitars that stay in tune practically forever, or need the tiniest little tweak, and they suddenly feel like they're in tune and sound in tune, and play for an hour and they're still in tune, or even, you know, pick them up 2 weeks later and they're practically in tune. A tiny tweak, no fighting it, in it goes, sweet to the ear, and away you go playing it. And to me, that's the #1 priority of a guitar, is that it plays and stays in tune. You may have everything else right. It may be the loveliest action in the universe. It may be the gorgeousest finish. It may have Gibson on the headstock. But if it doesn't play and stay in tune, none of that stuff will compensate for that, and it will stay on the peg, right? That's my experience over the years. So we get the neck relief right for the kind of playing you want. And in this case, starting off with a requested low action. So we go for low all round, as flat as we can reasonably get it, and it still plays well, as low at both ends. Obviously lower down here makes the notes up here easier to play. Some people, again, if they're used to great big, you know, pushing them half of an inch or an inch to get into the board, then low action here can feel really weird. But for some people it can just feel much better to have the lower action here, and that's achieved by lowering the bridge or the saddles if it's a Strat style guitar. But it can't be done on most guitars unless you level the frets, because it's the uneven frets in the sequence that usually are stopping you setting the choice low action that you want. The reason, just out of interest, the reason I don't offer a light setup is that a vast majority of guitars that I set up require fret leveling to get the action to where the customer wants it. So there's no point taking in your guitar, charging you 35, 40, 50 quid, whatever the going rate is. And given that you've probably got it already set as low as it will go before it buzzes, and you've probably backed off, or previous owner or whoever has backed off, and it's about at its lowest possible height, what's the point if I can't adjust the bridge down any further because I'll get the same buzz and you'll hate it. What can I do? Well, I can take the strings off, I can clean the fingerboard, I can polish everything up a bit, I can check a few things, I can maybe check the nut, and if it's really bad I could replace it. But when I put the bridge back on, I can only ever get it down to as low as the frets will allow me. And actually, too often, and I've had this from loads of people who brought me, like nothing's been done to their guitar. Now, of course, something has been done, and the tech has maybe spent an hour and a half or whatever they spent, you know, trying to polish it up and do as much good for it as possible within those constraints, that it still has uneven frets and you can't go any lower because the frets are uneven. So to me, I couldn't face doing that, taking money off somebody and giving them back a guitar that to them felt almost exactly the same as it was when they gave it to me, and often actually worse, because people sometimes techs try and lower it and then they find the frets and they raise it higher, and sometimes to the customer they get it back even higher, harder to play than it went in. And that to me is just a waste of everybody's time. It's a recipe for bad feeling. So I decided early on that since a huge overwhelming majority of guitars that I was seeing, 95+% easily, required fret leveling to get them to a low action. And because most customers wanted a really low action, which was usually hindered by high frets, it just became part of what I do. And then later on, because this became such an important part of great tuning stability, the adjustable Tusq nut, well, first of all Tusq nut, but then the adjustable Tusq nut, that became a standard too. And so I just didn't think it was even, I mean, I offer people the choice because it looks slightly different, but I start from my start point is that I'm going to offer that as the sort of the complete setup. Why? Because it gives such great tuning stability and adjustability to make the guitar feel the way you want it to feel. So it's the maximum possible impact. Same with on a good quality Strat. Somebody brings me a good quality Strat, they want it to play really well. Then if it's got two horrible metal butterfly string trees, get a shot of them. Spend 10 quid and put on 2 Tusq string trees, which I've got a few kicking around here waiting for other jobs in the future. And I keep them now. I didn't used to keep them in stock. Now I have 4 to 6 in stock because I will make a decision for the customer to put those on. Everything else, you've got a Tusq nut, you've got this slack all stretched out of the strings. You've got a tremolo that will float perfectly on your Strat after the setup. And then you've got these little horrible string trees, metal string trees that are clamping the strings to the headstock, and you can hear it pinging as the string kind of scrapes in and out. Well, it's just a false economy to put those things back on. So I just ended up focusing on the quality of the outcome and not the expected range of things, which is why I don't offer a cheap £30–40 quick in and out setup. Anyway, I didn't mean to get into that, but just to explain, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of the relief out of the neck first, then I'm going to look at the, I'll do that first, and then I'm going to look at the bridge last fret action, I should say. So to take a little bit of relief out, I'm going to find the biting point for this hex key, and I'm just going to do a little bit of extra tightening turn clockwise when you're looking down at the end of the neck, a little bit of clockwise turn on the truss rod to dial a little bit more. Now it's pretty flat now, it might be almost too flat. So when you do that, you get a feel of how subtle, no, how sensitive the truss rod is and how small the adjustments will be needed. That might be a 1/16th of a circle or even 32nd of a circle. Very, very small amounts. Some aren't that sensitive, they take more cranking. But don't be afraid to use your truss rod. I mean, you can go extremes in either direction without breaking it. It'd be very hard pushed to break a truss rod. I've tried deliberately to break one. I took one. Did I take it out? Or was it in the? It was in the neck. I had an old neck, and I had it clamped to the desk, the bench, and I was pulling on it with a spanner on a hex key, and I couldn't break anything. It was as it happened, it was seized anyway. That's why I experimented on it. But I couldn't break the thing. I couldn't get it unseized, but I couldn't break it. Okay, now I'm going to take a look at the last fret action on this guitar, and it's not bad anyway, right? We probably aren't far off the mark for where I'd go. And right now, with a bit of adjustment on the neck, I'd say that's pretty close to where the best we'll get it. Now, that's cool. It's come down for a setup, and what we may well find is that the action that it's been set, we may find that either we have some zizzy notes, or some things don't play properly. This is quite good. I've noticed that Epiphones have been improving. Okay, that's not bad. In terms of chokes, these are 10 strings, and boy, are they killing my fingers. We're killing it off up here, right at the top. But you know, generally speaking, like the last few more recent, relatively recent Epiphones I've had through, that's not bad at all. For a lot of people, that would be a playable action straight out of the box, or as it is here. And a little bit of buzz going on here. Okay, and this may be, the thing I would say is if you're hearing a buzz all the way up, mostly, buzz all the way up is more likely indicative that for this kind of string on this kind of guitar there isn't quite enough room. So I would say that may be an indication that we're a little bit flat on the fingerboard for this kind of guitar. It's not a shredder, so I'm going to put in, or I'm going to take it back again a little 32nd of a thingy, I want to get it to not quite as deep as it was before, but not dead, or not as small a gap. Okay, that's back where closer. Okay. Interesting dynamic is when you press hard, when you press lightly on a string, it doesn't deform, and the string, the gap over the next fret, i.e. the new first fret in the sequence, is at its default. It's set by the geometry of the bridge. Okay. When you press down though, in between two frets which are quite tall, it distorts and lifts the front edge of the string after the next fret. That creates a bigger gap on the fret afterwards, or the first fret after the fretted 0 fret. So you might get buzz like that. You press it really hard and you get rid of more of it, which is quite interesting. Right, is this thing still warm? It's still warm. I don't want to freeze. Okay, so I'm not 100% sure just yet that we can get any, well, certainly we can't really go any lower than this, so I wouldn't be trying to push this any lower. There are some necks, in my experience, you can almost universally get lower than a 1.5 target, which is where I aim for, and a 1.2, 1.3 on this side, and sort of spread in between, and that's an approximate spread, by the way. That seems to work for 12-inch radius guitars, Les Pauls, 335s, 339s, Thunderbirds, stuff like that. When you get to when the radius starts getting tighter with more vintage style Strats, Tellies, things like that, it can be harder to get to that 1.5. That's the ultimate lowest. However, the exception to all of that, it seems to be the SG, a good SG, particularly one where the bulk of the neck is outside of the body. They seem to be so responsive that a lot of times you can get the last fret low E action quite comfortably down to about 1 millimeter. Now, to be able to do that on an SG consistently, whereas other guitars, other types don't, must be something to do with what's different about the neck construction. And the only thing I know, or the principal thing I know, is that in the SG, almost the entirety of the truss rod is outside of the bulk of the mass of the gripping part of the body. Whereas on any guitar with set necks like this, where the fingerboard goes into the neck, into the body a little way, and certainly on glued Les Paul necks, certainly on bolted necks of all kinds, there's an area here which is stiff versus the more responsive curving neck. This one is the thickening of the neck starts about here, and the glued in bit kind of goes from here to here. So what it means is that everything from here downwards is a bit more rigid compared to the more flexible neck. So that's possibly why there are some other constraints on the lowness of the action you can get because of this. And as I say, with the SG, when the entire neck starts right outside the body, truss rod starts about there as well, then it seems like the whole neck behaves as a single piece, which is great. And it's because of that, it seems to allow us to get to a better fret leveling. Hey, we shall see. Right, so my feeling is this is pretty damn good. On this guitar, we're going to check it over. I'm going to give it a clean up. I'll take this off and get under here as well if it's, I think it's something that Dominic has recently acquired. So as it's coming to him anew, it's nice to give it a sort of spring clean and get underneath the bits where it often gets grubby. So that's what I'll do here. Take these off and just be able to get under it, clean all those. There you go. It's not bad at all under there. So we'll still give it a nice clean. And we'll just check the electrics and check that there's nothing wobbly. And the strap buttons they need a bit of a tighten. So things like that. We'll do the best we can for it. We'll do a fret level to free up the bends up here, because this is a nice level. We're going to aim for the same level back. And I think the extra, whatever, where we may not have to level too hard, I think a bit of extra work is going to be needed on these fret ends. to soften them up. But I'm going to leave the action where it is out down at the last fret. I'm going to leave the nut as is for the time being because it's in, well, it doesn't really matter which way we do it. Let's do the nut now while we're at it. So I'm going to slack off the strings. So we'll fit the nut we mean to use anyway, and then we'll go from there. So when we're changing a nut like this, we're going to take off the old one. On a guitar like this, it's usually fairly easy to take off. Occasionally a little bit of glue brings a little bit of flake of the wood from underneath with it, but more or less it's usually quite easy to do. It can be a lot harder when you're trying to remove a Strat or Telly nut that's sort of buried in a trench. He's a bit grubby. I don't know what's been. It could do with a clean. I don't see much in the way of play wear on these frets. There is a little bit, so it suggests these may have been leveled before. I have a feeling they have actually, and that probably explains why they're so good, relatively speaking. I'm kind of crediting Epiphone with it, but it might not be down to them. Now, just one little thing. When you look down here, when I look down here, I can see that the body of the nut extends a little bit below this black line of finish. So what they've done is they've done the finish, and then they've machine cut a slot into which this nut now sits. And what we don't want to do is whack it really hard, because chances are it may pull up and flake off some, kind of peel back some of this here. So we need to strike it, we need to strike it to get it freed up, but we want to sort of try and gently move it after that. So I'm just going to give it a kind of a little bit of a sharp tap. Well, that was good. That just did what it did. If it didn't come out, I would work very carefully to get it to come out without lifting anything else. Very small amount of glue holding it in place, which is all you really need. And we're going to replace it with this fella here to do the same thing. Now for that, we want it also to sit into the little into the existing gap. We don't want to widen that nut slot or do anything to it. We want to leave it as is, so that in future times Dominic could replace this one and return it to standard, if you like. What I am going to do is I'm just going to gently scrape away any obvious flakes of super glue. I had a question about which glue to use for nuts, and you know, you can use none. If you can get your nut to fit snugly enough, then an ideal situation, a purist situation, might be to use none, because it makes it easier to remove. But what you also don't want to have happen is for it to go sideways when somebody bends the notes. So it needs to be well held in there. Now, what am I looking for? I'm looking for some sanding blocks. Okay, so I've got this already partly sanded down. I've made this from resin. I've made the base from resin, and these come with a little hex key which goes with the guitar, which winds the nut out of this little cradle that it sits in. Nobody seems to make these bottom bits, or a bottom piece that I can use, so I made my own. Because once I noticed that Tusq were making these, and they started making them, I think, back in about 2015, and they made them in response to Gibson's creating a bad nut on their Les Pauls at the time, which was made of, it was effectively a 0 fret, and it was made of brass, I think, and it notched very, very quickly, as brass does and as 0 frets do. And as a result of that, customers were buying their guitars and then finding that before they even really left the workshop or the showroom, they were already notched, and it makes a horribly annoying clicky sound and feeling when they notch like that. So I think what Gibson did was they re-engineered that, made it from titanium, which was a smart move. But obviously, they don't seem to sell those parts, or I can't. Maybe Gibson does, but I've not gone out to try and buy one. And I imagined for a Gibson Les Paul part, the titanium insert replacement would be fairly expensive. So I'm not in the market for it. So I'm going to do a bit of sort of careful sanding here to get this to fit exactly, using whatever blocks I've got that work and do the business. Yeah, so anyways, so Gibson created these titanium things as a fix to this problem, but at the same time as they were doing that, it seems that Graf Tech, who make the Tusq nuts, spotted it and realized there was an opportunity for them, and they started manufacturing these Tusq inserts. And I guess maybe a year or two after they were doing that, I became aware of them, and I just saw the opportunity to fix or solve a problem that I'd been struggling with for quite some time, which was the effort it takes to cut down nut slots till you get the perfect first fret action. And that's a lot of sanding time and cutting and filing time, and it's a pain. But actually there wasn't any real alternative, because by that time I'd discovered the centrality, the importance, shall we say, of the right first fret action in how your guitar plays. And I just basically, there was no alternative. I was always going to get that right first fret action. So to begin with, I was sort of obliged to basically obliged to sand it, to file it by hand, and that wasn't ideal for the reason that you have to cut down into the nut, and that means cutting down into the slots that they've produced at the factory, which are, I would say, almost certainly smoother than you will end up making with your Hosco nut files, or your, whatever brand you're using. So it seemed a shame to kind of spoil the preset factory made those things, slots. But there was no choice, because you had to get down to the right first fret action for it to play well. The only other alternative is to go at it from underneath, but my experience of doing that was that realistically you almost never got there. It was too easy to overcut too many nuts down the tube, and cost a lot. You only had to overcut by a fraction, and you had to start again with a new nut. So I found it very difficult, so that I ended up always going down from the top, and that obviously meant cutting into the factory slots, which I wasn't massively happy about. But it still worked really well with the Tusq nut. You don't have a problem still. But anyhow, so when I came across this, I just thought, well, there's my attention to detail with the first fret action sorted, courtesy of Graf Tech's adjustable Tusq nut insert. Now what I'm doing is I'm just getting this down to just about exactly the same size to fit in that little gap. It sits in there quite nicely. It might actually be a fraction too loose on the outside, but on this side, but you can't see it, so it's not a problem. So there it is, that fits into the gap. Now I have to get it to the right height. That's the next thing. So right now I can test it if I'm in the mood. Keep in mind my strings are still on here, so I'll just put these two middle strings on, and I can see that they're giving me a way high action. So I'm way too tall to begin with. Now we make sure when we begin this that these screws are fairly far out. We want the nut sitting in its little cradle, not on its grub screws at all. Now from that point we want to keep working the bottom of this now until when we put the strings on, with the nut sitting right low as it can, the strings sit on the first fret, and then we'll take them up from there. So that's quite a bit of downward sanding, and with this I'm going to use a rougher grade of paper, and I'm going to I'm going to just keep watching what I'm doing here. I have to do it at the right angle, right? Because if you go off on the wrong angle, it will not work out very well. So we've got quite a bit to take off, and it's a hard little object to hold, and the paper is a bit worn out at this point in time. But I'm just going to keep taking away. I know roughly I've got a load. I can sort of sense how much I've got to take away. And the secret is to keep an eye on the squareness of the bottom compared to the sides, or in relation to the sides. So we're going to keep on going down. Again, I'm just going to see how far off. Well, we're a good millimetre off. Now, if that's the case, there's no reason why we can't. If we want to speed the process up a little bit, we can just put this in place. We can drop our D in there, and we can actually see what we can see with the feeler gauge how roughly how much space we've got here, and I suspect it's going to be well over a millimetre, but let's put a millimetre's worth in there. So that's 70, 95 millimetre just to start, and a thin little bendy one. So that's a millimetre. See, that's why it's hopeless, because it's bent. Okay, so that's, even if we took a millimetre off there, we still got some extra. So we could take I bet we could take 1.2 off and still not be on the deck, which is where we actually want to be. So let's try 1.2. Yeah, 1.2 easily. What else we got left on here? 1.2 mils. I don't know what that one is. Forgotten what that is. That's 60. I think that's a 60. So call it 1.8. I could double check it. Although I left my decent thingies at home because I'm using them for something. On. Let's see what this actually comes in at. Oh right, that says 1 point whatever it wants to say. That says 1.5. Let's call it 1.5. So we could lose 1.5 off the bottom of this nut right now. And if I mark it up, that gives us sort of an idea of how much we can take off. 1.5 is probably a good enough reason to get the rasp on it. So I'm just going to mark this out here, and my pen would work, draw that line on there, and I'll draw it across with any appropriate flat surface. And actually I'll draw it this way so I can just track the edge of the nut itself, the adjustable part. Okay, that gives me a clear view of what I can get rid of. Now, I'm going to go over here out of range, but I'm just going to put it in the vise. Drop everything, some pickups. I'm going to put it in the vise, and I'm going to cut it with this rasp, which would be a much quicker way of doing it. And then I'll come back in and fine tune it. Thank you. That just hopefully speeds things along a little bit, although I've whipped out a bit, so we've still got some more to go. this out. I promise you I will. Can I get this out? Maybe, maybe not. Difficult to see what's actually happening here, but I think that will probably do. Right, and then we'll just sand this out. We'll just check on the height first. We'll still be hopefully, yeah, quite a bit above, so we've got some more working down to do. We've taken a fair big chunk of it off to begin with. If you have time, put fresh sandpaper on, because that will make this process more rewarding. Okay, a bit more upwards. Now I find when I'm doing this, once I've got the right sort of angle, I find rocking the whole workpiece backwards and forwards is better than kind of moving your arms. So I tend to get into that rocking motion. Still quite a bit to go, and the sandpaper has lost its mojo a bit really. We'll get there slowly. Still a fair bit off the mark despite how I marked it. Right, I'm going to go and make a cup of tea in a minute, take a short pause. But we're getting there. We're about half a mil off, but I might just do a little bit more. I'm going to put these on pause. I'm going to charge the phone, stop this one, and then come back in a minute. Hey, we are without the Hawaii camera for the time being, but that's okay. I've got the nuts cut to the correct size downwards, and I've spent a little time with my cup of tea off camera making sure the slot is level, and it's quite hard to do. You can buy this is a little Hosco fret slot file. It's very flat and it fits in anything as small as a Strat nut slot, or in the case of this one, you know, across the throughout, you know, on the whole width of this one, which is obviously much wider. So that works. That's quite expensive. I think that was about £30 or 25 quid or something. But if you haven't got that, you can work carefully with a flat blade and kind of work it backwards and forwards and just get rid of crunchy glue that's built up. And then once you've done that, you'll find that your nut, now properly sized, fits absolutely perfectly into that area there. Actually, what I'm getting is a tiny bit of a little creak when I press really hard, and that's suggesting to me that this is not 100% flat, but it's pretty close. I mean, you can't get your finger in to feel it or make any guess, but it will work. With a little bit of glue, it will work perfectly well. So the only thing I'm concerned about now is the ends of my nut, and I'm just going to have a quick look, and they actually feel very good. So I'm not going to do any more sanding there. One thing I might do with this nut is, because when I made the base, it gets a bit of what's the word? That stuff is WD-40. I'm going to clean it off, so which I need to wind these on. The other thing I'm probably going to do, actually, just for the sake of this, I'll push the little grub screws back in, and I'll use them to push the nut insert bit out of the base, which will help me just separate the two bits. When I've done that, I just put the base down in the direction I know it's going to fit in a minute, and I'm going to then dial these back to just point where the grub screw is just proud of the plastic, and I'm going to use my flat sanding beam, a little one. This is an aluminium one, and I'm going to hold this dead level, and I'm going to run this carefully backwards and forwards whilst holding it in place. Now, an aim here is to ground out the little, they're not sharp pointed ones, but I just want to round them off a little bit so that they, when they press down, they're not anywhere near as sharp pressing into the resin. They've got a flatter footprint, which is really good, what we need. And then I'm just going to sort of run it until it's pretty much dead smooth. That's great. So I'll just get our little, oh yes, only one camera, get our little thingamajig, and I'll just put that back in there, and I'll just wind out the screws again a little bit because we want the insert to sit right inside again, nice and smooth. And the funny thing is, once you put it back in, it never sits exactly the same, even though I have, that is exact correct. Well, let's just check it's the right way around. I'm pretty certain it is. You can see because the writing on the insert leaves an impression. So if you're not entirely sure, if you can get the light just right. Okay, there's my numbers. So that's back to front. That's the correct way around. How did that happen? I got it back to front. Weird. Yeah. Right. So that's quite important. So the thing to remember too is once this base is fitted, there you go, that's a much better fit. Once this is now glued into place, the top bit will come out, can come out. It's quite snug, so there's no reason why it will, but it can come out. And if it does come out, then, or to prevent it from coming out, there's no problem if it does. Just put it to one side, do your work on the guitar, change the strings, whatever you've got to do. Then when you restring the middle two first, and that will press down. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a dab of glue on each side of this. It's quite thick glue now at the moment. Put a dab of glue either side of this, and then we're going to put it in place. And I'm going to use the strings to locate it and hold it down. Now that actually looks and feels great to me, but we'll put the strings in if we can get them over quick enough. Central strings, the G and the D, and then we'll just put it down. Okay, now we'll put all of them on for a minute, if I can get them on quick enough. That's fractionally above the fret actually. That's okay, it's close enough to being on the deck as we wanted. Okay, so the key thing here is I've got the alignment right, and that's perfectly good. I'm happy with that. Then we can put them under tension. And this will basically, that will now hold this in place, and the glue will set, and we've now got our adjustable nut in place. Now what we will do anyway is now we can raise the nut a little bit up, so that we make the screws bite a tiny little bit, and as we turn, up come the strings. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong fret. Help if I looked at the first fret, not that one. Okay, so they're all up in there's a gap at the first fret. Right, so that's cool. This is not in the right place. Fallen off the thingy. What I'm going to do, a thing I'm going to just check here is the intonation as well, because often I get caught out with these things and have to fiddle with the bridge too late in the day. So what I'd like to do is detect check how good the intonation is. It'll be slightly different with a new set of strings, or maybe slightly different, but at least I'll know to begin with whether it looks like I'm going to need to remove any saddles. That's sometimes a situation you get into with these tunematic bridges, which is why I don't like them at all. Now, where is my tuning fork gone? Trouble is, the magnets are great, but sometimes they pick the magnet up with the tool. Okay, so we're close enough now to use the tuner, and really it's just to check. What I'm going to do is I'm going to check the intonation, tweak it if necessary, and then I will prepare the frets for leveling, and we'll get the action exactly right, then we'll level to that action, and after that once we take the strings off again, I will file the fret edges just to make sure. Now I'm just going to make sure these are at the right height now. That one there. That's good. Now we get the tuning. Okay. I'm just trying to make sure we're not a mile off, and that if I have to turn any of these saddle blocks around, I'll do it while the strings are off after leveling. But I'll know. Hear the spring rattling? Annoying. Good. Seems pretty much spot on. Good. That gives me confidence that I won't get caught out at the last minute, which is sometimes what happens when you get all the way through, and then as you put new strings on and you go to intonate, and you get a surprise that you have to take the bridge out off and take it apart and move saddle blocks around, turning them back to front to get a little bit of extra saddle travel out of them, which is an absolute pain. Right, that's good. Now we'll mark up the frets in preparation for the leveling, and I can just move that off to one side. If something a customer or a viewer pointed out once to me, they got quite nervy and said, if you're dropping strings off the side or in this situation, then stick some material there that's going to catch them and prevent them cutting in. I honestly never noticed or never thought I had a problem with that, but you never know. Now, just feeling these frets now, looking up close as we can while we're getting ready to do this bit, they do look like they've been leveled in the past, which is cool, and it may explain their relative goodness. The method I use, I would say, is only a few small percent more accurate, if at all, if it's even meaningful to say that, by comparison to a more traditional method where you take the strings off, flatten the neck, and do it with a file, a block, a leveling block, or a leveling file. This method, I think, is a little bit more accurate for a number of reasons, but I don't actually do it this way for the accuracy. I do it this way primarily for the minimization of fret metal loss. So this way takes the minimum of fret metal, gets I call it maximum accuracy for minimum fret metal loss, and to me that seems a pretty good reason for doing it, because fret metal is the life and soul of your guitar, really. Now this one isn't a new guitar by any means, so there's enough fret metal here to level and make it play very nicely. But you know, once they get past a few years old, you may be kind of looking at starting to get to a marginal level of fret wire, which you don't really want to be, or you might be very nervous about leveling, and certainly you don't want to level any more than you absolutely have to. Let's just get this to tune again, just quickly, and as close as I can, near enough. Good enough. Right, so now ready to fret level. We're only at 44%. Maybe let's run this bit. I don't think we need to Hawaii film the sanding out or even the stringing. This will be the last bit we need to do. Okay, photo, video. Try and get that in there. Where are we? Yeah, that will be right. Go on that. Try again. Go. Oh, we go. We're already go. Okay. Stop. Synchronized. Okay. Right. Time to level. So here we go. Now my principal target is to get that last little choke out of the top there, and if we do, that will be great because it's a very low action, and but we won't, because it's relatively accurate already. We won't need to be moving much metal at all, which is good because that preserves fret life, as we've already mentioned. So when you come to restring or take the strings off, take them, leave the middle ones in longest. So take from the outside, loosen from the outside in, and then when you string the guitar with new strings, string from the middle two outwards. And the middle two will hold the adjustable nut in place, so you won't run the risk of it pinging off sideways. So all that will happen is the Tusq part will go for a flight through the air and land somewhere. Now I'm sort of concentrating on this top end a little bit here. I'm making sure it touches everywhere, but there is a high fret showing up here, a few high frets showing up here, so that's possibly where we've got the choke out that we're going to be wanting to clean up. So the nice thing about this method of leveling is that as you do your level, you can replace your string and every note plays nicely. Now I'm not testing the bends right now, because when there's one thing to get all the notes playing beautifully cleanly, and then you've got a nice level frets, but there may be an additional level of levelness needed. And that's when we're looking to level just enough so that when we bend the E string across into what I call the G track, where the G string lives, either side of G string, if it's going to choke, it's choking there because there's still a bit of a high spot somewhere in the G track, nowhere else. Now when we've leveled the E track on its own, we're not bending any other strings into the E track from anywhere usually, so it's not really important to try bends at that point, but we will try them from this next track onwards to make sure that we're getting everything cleared up the way we want. Here's where I trash my fingernails every time. Okay, so using this truss rod tool as a leveling tool, this technique, I should say, more than anything, gives you a very interesting sort of diagnostic feedback. It tells you what's going on when you look at it. It can also tell you very quickly if a guitar's been leveled before. It shows up flat spots that are still flat sometimes if somebody hasn't recrowned it, and you can very quickly get these flat spots which you know you haven't cut with the file you've just been using, but yet they're flat. They're flat because they've been cut before. Wow, nice. Ooh. It's getting very good. Yeah, so if that's quite often you can get that, and your first impression is, my God, I've just leveled the hell out of these frets, and then you realise that all you've done is you've basically scraped the black marker pen off what was already a flat fret from somebody else's previous leveling, and you get to, if you use this method regularly, you get to recognise when that's the case, and it's quite common actually. It's even common with guitars. Some are done in the factory these days, just given a quick level and then chucked out the door, or maybe the frets are offered up to a buffing wheel and sort of just softened out a bit, polished out a bit, but you've still got the same basic shape, the flat spots on the frets, and then they go out to the retailer like that. Actually, it's better than not doing it at all, in my opinion, because at least when they do that, there's a very good chance that a customer has available a range of actions they can, or a low action they can set it to, and that's always a much more pleasing thing when you get your guitar and you can lower the action. Very good. Tone and a half. It's just verging on it. I might do the tiniest bit more, a tiny bit more in the G track, but that's nigh on perfect. So my ears tell me that's very good. So what I'll do is I'll just focus a little bit on this top end here, and what I mean by focus is I'm just pressing down a little bit, just to try and eke out the last little bit of unevenness on the G track. But that's really good. I'll stop there, recalibrate now for the D, and we'll just carry on this way. I recalibrate coming towards me, and my way of looking at it is I calibrate north of the string I'm working on. And believe it or not, it does change over the time. Different spots on the neck can have very slightly different curve profiles according to this tool. That's about right. Mind you, the adjustments are so tiny you have to feel them to know you're making them. They're not, you couldn't put a notch on this thing and go, right, that's 2 clicks that way. It's very, very subtle. But you do it until you get the right feel when you place it down on the 3 brass feet. And that's what tells you when you're on the mark or when you're not. One of the things I think in the past, using this method, because I've utilised this method principally for saving fret metal, or preserving fret metal, one of the limitations of it is that I think I've got a tendency to wimp out and stop too early. That's not bad at all. I'll give it one more tiny little look, but that is incredibly low, really. That's just over a millimetre. So really, you know, we wouldn't be expecting that to do any better than that, but I will just do that again. That was the D, wasn't it? Yeah. I'll just give that another tiny go. Yeah, so my tendency, if anything, my fault is that I will wimp out before taking too much metal, but sometimes I will not get rid of uneven spots. And actually sometimes what the distinction I made earlier between what I call fret slap and fret buzz is usually much more located in a particular area, and is telltale is that it's in one spot or a couple of different discrete spots, and that is that way because it's been caused by a fret here and there, usually either one that's slightly tall compared to the others, and very often actually caused by the opposite, one that's smaller, shorter, flatter than the others, and a flat one makes the next one in line high. So the playing mechanics, if you like, don't care whether you've got a low fret or a high fret, because low frets make the next fret high, so relatively speaking the next one's a high fret, even though it's caused by the low one behind it, and high frets are what they say, high, so they get in the way. So quite often it's my experience that using this method you will end up doing most work chasing 2 or 3 frets that have been pressed in too hard, or for some reason they're sitting low, and you have to level everything around them. That's better than it was by miles. Yeah, that's not bad at all. We'll do the last one now. Yeah, that's interesting. That's incredibly low, and I wasn't sure how much of that buzz we'd get rid of there. I thought it was more like fret slap, but it's responded really well. And I think that's because even though it is fret slap, this tool imposes very gently and very elegantly its perfect mathematical curve onto this imperfect little rack of bumps sticking up. And because we impose this more perfect curve onto that, I've not got enough curve now, because we impose this notional curve, this mathematical curve described by these 3 points, it seems to, for however tiny amount it is required, it seems to eke out that extra bit of space needed to cure fret slap. And I've been slightly hesitant to claim that it can do that, and being prepared to raise the action if we get fret slap all the way. Sometimes it's just there isn't enough relief, and or sometimes this set of strings on this guitar just don't seem to want to go to that nominally low action, and I kind of compromise and go back a tiny fraction. But actually I'm wondering whether what this is achieving is rather more elegant than I had originally thought. So it could well be that it's taking this fret slap and it's just hollowing out the a bit there, see? So it's like a little patch, if anything. So I'm going to redo and concentrate just up here by the 12th fret. It's getting better. So this is the bit that's quite challenging for me, and often, as I say, I might just sort of chicken out at this point. So I'm going to, we've got quite a lot of fret metal, there's no risk of grinding it down to nothing. And I'm going to now truss this tool to do what it does best, which is to impose that nice smooth curve onto this thin fretboard and iron out those slight humps or those tiny alterations in the neck that actually you can't see when you're looking at it. That's a ton better than when we played it first time, isn't it? That's just, you know, go rewind to the beginning and that's fixed that. Well, okay, I learned something. Even after about 1,000 of these, I would say I've learned something there. That what I'm writing off as fret slap and uncurable by fret leveling, actually the banana tool has the ability to correct that as well. If you trust it and keep on going a little bit further, it will carve out, and it sounds a bit brutal, but it will scoop out the space it needs to clear that clatter, or that slap as I would call it. So at this point I'm just cleaning my hands a minute just to get rid of some of the grime on them, because this builds up quite a bit of fret dust, as you can probably see. Okay, so we're done with the fret leveling. I'm very pleased with that. Good old Epiphones, they do come up very well in the fret leveling department, in my experience. Now I'm going to take these off. I'm going to probably try and keep them for sacrificial strings for you know, use on another setup, because it's always handy to have some. Good old Simon Sacrificial Strings is a regular supporter of Relove guitars and sends me bundles of exotic Chinese cheapo strings, but great for sacrificial purposes. But I was so busy making those left-handed strats running up to Christmas that I've used up all of those sacrificial strings that he sent me, Simon. Thank you very much, but I've used them all up. Anyway, so right now I'm sort of scavenging and keeping these because these would be fairly new. I guess the seller would have put these on the guitar, so we'll keep these for another sacrificial setup purpose. Okay, so these can come out. If we want, this can come out at this point, so you can see how it fits in or comes out, and then we'll just get this out of the way. Now the next stage, that could be a major disaster. String hooks your clothes when you pull the guitar off the bench. Not nice. Now I'll just take this thingy stop bar off a minute, push this to one side, and I'll just now use these pliers to straighten these strings out. A bit of a boring drawn out thing. So the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to mark up the frets again, and I'm going to, there's a bunch of stuff probably off camera already because it's repetitive, but I'm going to mark the frets up. I'm going to just show you starting recrowning the frets with my trusty StewMac crowning file, and then I'll finish that off camera. And then what I'll do off camera is I'll cover the whole of the neck. I'll clean it up a bit and then I'll cover the whole of the neck in masking tape, and then we'll sand and polish out the frets. But before that I will use the file to tidy up these sharp ends, and I'll show you a little bit of that too, what I'm doing. There's a couple of techniques you can use. I'm going to use a StewMac fret end file, but if you haven't got that, it's not the end of the world. You can use other kinds of files. The important bit is that they have to have a safe edge, so that if they scrape on the wood, they're not cutting strips out of the wood and making a mess. And if you don't have a file that you can bring up to the fret ends, well, then what you can do is you can use sandpaper quite effectively. Now it's almost impossible to sand the end of frets without touching the binding or the finish on the binding in some way. It's just a par for the course. There's no way you can do it. If you're ever in a situation where there's so little there that any treatment of the frets causes the binding to effectively, go down to wood, then you have an option, or it's possible to add some more. And in a guitar like this, which has got a poly finish, you can add some, I would use wipe on poly, and I would paint it or wipe it on, build it up over 3, 4, 5 coats along the edge, and then just sand it back and know that I've got enough room to sand it smooth and then take it to a shine if I want the shine, or satin if I don't. But like I say, you can't treat fret ends without touching this binding. It's pretty much impossible. You can't individually support every little nook and cranny of the finish. So just be aware of that. But you can. So if it's important, if you're not confident and it's not really a problem with your fret ends, then I would say don't worry about it rather than attack them. But so for example, if these are feeling sharp, I can get my StewMac file and I can run just a little bit down the end of the file. Now you can hear it scraping, which is telling me that that's the sharp cut edge of the fret, kind of connecting with the grain, the grit pattern on my file. Now that's pretty smooth compared to before, because the thing about these, the way the finish goes around these frets is that it doesn't go all the way to the end. In fact, let me just see, is it the end that's the, yeah, I see some of the end is sharp. There's two parts to it really. There's the very end, and if it's shortened or if the wood has shrunk at all in the fingerboard, then this sort of shovelly, sharp chisel edge can stick out, and it only needs to stick out by a tiny part of a millimetre for you to feel it, because your fingers are massively sensitive. So you can do what I'm doing here, which is to kind of go along it. I'm rolling off the finish a little bit, and of course it will touch the finish. It's not making any unpleasant marks, but you've got to be very aware and very light with your touch and keep it on the metal bit itself, and be conscious that you may go to the side of it and it may just contact the finish. But the fact there's a sharp edge there, you can hear it digging into the grain stripes on the, see, there isn't any there. So where there is a sharp edge, it kind of, you hear metal on metal. Anyway, that's one thing you can do. You go down all the files, all the frets, go down all the frets and just try and make sure that that little thin razor sharp beveled edge is no longer sticking out. And you can hear I'm making contact with it there and there. That still doesn't get into the corner edge of the fret, which can also present a sharp edge. So now we can use this same file to take care of that, and I'll show you that in a minute. Once I've done this, I'll just do this edge for a minute, and then I'll switch and show you the corner rounding process. And then once we've done this, then the aim will be to allow the sandpaper that we're going to use for when we come to sanding and polishing the frets, to allow that sandpaper to get hold of these fret ends in the process and soften them up. So whatever I've just done there now will get rounded off by progressively finer grades of sandpaper. So I have a safe edge here on this one, as I do on this other kind. This is like a crowning file, but it's an end thing, and that's where if you've got a very sharp face on your fret, you can use this, and I think it's probably a good idea on these actually, to just go down here like this, and we're just rounding off that, otherwise it would be a very sharp flush cut edge. Now, it's very pretty when it's flush cut, it looks very neat. However, the flusher it is, the sharper it is, as simple as that. There's no two ways around it. You can't get this geometrically beautiful mirror-like, or sharp-edged fret and expect it not to show up under your finger, under the nerves in your fingers. So what I'm doing is I'm just rolling this file around the edge, and I can see it turning over those, I guess, the squared edges of the arch. All right. So I do both of those jobs on that side, and then the final job for each side would be to take this one with the soft edge down, and I would go up. Now this sometimes it's actually only making a mark on the dust, but you just run this up right into the corner, and this takes the little toenail bit off, right? And that's a bit that can actually still be sharp when you think you've got everything else taken care of. Now again, this rounds out those otherwise sort of mathematically created looking frets, but the question is, you know, do you want comfort or do you want the look of the thing? And I think we want comfort first. So necessarily this rounds off those beautiful polished faces a little bit, and they look a little softer and a little bit more organic. But as I say, my experience is that they play a lot better. Now I would then switch back. Oh, there's another thing I'm going to do here. This can be sharp. The back edge of this thingy I'm talking about is the resin, custom made resin base of that thing. So I'm just going to put some green tape on here as a protector, and then I'm going to get some sandpaper like this. I'm going to use the safe edge of this as well. I'm just going to run round that sharp edge and just soften it off. There's no need to have a kind of deadly razor sharp edge to something which is just going to catch your hand all day long and upset you. Okay, so that's that done. Just a little detail, but makes it bearable. So I'm going to do the same on that side, but before I do that, I'll show you the one other job on these frets that we're going to do, if I can remember. It's obvious, I just had it. It's not that rocket science. Oh, this right there. Right, so we mark up all of these frets again, and then we recrown them. So any flat spots, we can take off the edges of the flat spots, bringing in a curve towards the middle. So we're restoring the basic arch shape of the fret, but doing so in such a way that it doesn't get any lower. And the masking marker pen is our way of making sure that it doesn't get any lower. And we do this by choosing our side of the tool, and I keep this file here, this brush here, to keep the file unclogged. So I use it and I go over the top, and I see it tells me straight away how much there is to be rounded off, how flat the fret was, and then I just keep working the tool until there's, in fact I might as well do all of these now and then switch off. But we go down these, and this is a good if you use a file like this is when you'll find out how much you really did or didn't take off in fret leveling compared to what you thought. And if like me now, you sort of can fairly whiz down here and there's not a lot of pausing and scraping away, then you actually haven't taken much at all. You can really whiz down. You'll spot when we come to a fret that was higher and we've had to take more metal off it, like this one, because I have to stop and work it a bit longer, like that. But their aim is to round it off and leave a little strip of pen and then move on. And like I say, that little strip of pen is the indicator that we haven't touched the top of the fret, basically. It's very simple, and if we haven't touched the top of the fret, then we haven't lowered it any. So we can be confident that the relative levelness that we just spent time getting with the, what I call the banana file, is left untouched. So we will still have that relative levelness once we polish out these frets. Assuming, of course, that we polish them all out roughly the same amount with the sandpaper. If you stay on one spot forever, or use a heavy grade of sandpaper on one spot and then a light grade on the other, of course you'll get unevenness come back in. But assuming that we treat them all pretty much the same, treat all frets the same when it comes to the sanding part, then we will end up with a polished out neck of fretboard that is as level as when we leveled it just now, and nice and shiny, ready to play. In a way, you could sort of use this file here as well to round off the edges. So if you didn't want to buy that one would probably do the same job. It's just using it in a slightly different position. And like I said, I've used blocks like this in the past with the a kind of safe edge here, and then you, or say safe edge along here, and then you can just go into the corner and do that. So, you know, I'd like to not always use expensive things, or use as affordable things as possible. So the day before yesterday, I finished a build here in the workshop. This is the first guitar I've made from scratch in the workshop, and I did it as the source material for my next ebook, which is 6 Steps to Guitar Build Heaven. And I know everybody and their uncle has written an ebook on how to make guitars, and there's more than enough information in the world out there on how to make guitars. What I've done is I've focused on some essential bits of holy grail information that are all about giving your guitar a sort of heart and soul that's going to guarantee that it plays well. And it all comes down to a couple of very important things which this ebook will show. So it's going to be different, I think, from a lot of other approaches. That's the aim anyway. And on top of that, everything has been done with, have I just been down this side? No, I went down that way, down the far side. And then, right. So this is, I've already done the, I've gone mad for a minute. Yeah, so it's about using, again, the least expensive tools. So for example, I did a show how to do a complete refret. For the project, I'm recommending the reader uses a cheap Chinese Strat style paddle neck for £19, and I show how to upcycle that neck and repurpose it and refret it, reshape it and refinish it for what am I doing? I'm going this way. But I'm going yes, so I'm showing how to repurpose it, that neck, for this to make an inexpensive but very nice playing neck. And I show how to do it with 0 expensive tools. And if I said to you that I refretted the guitar neck with using a craft knife blade to pull the frets, an ordinary metal file to shape the frets, the bevels of the frets, ordinary pliers to cut them to length, the file to trim them or to tail them to the exact length, and get the bevel on them, and then some little pieces of wood to hammer the frets in, and because they're the exact size that they need it to be, there's almost no trimming work to do, but anything that was required was done with sandpaper. So it's really definitely focused on the low cost, easily available, and I just want to, as always, I want to demystify it from, you know, the risk of it being seen as this elite practice. So I'm kind of interested to see how well it comes out when I write it. And of course the funny part is, just at the point as I was realising I was going to write this ebook, my 7-year-old MacBook that I bought from my employer when I worked in London, and I bought before or just as I took redundancy, voluntary redundancy, and so I paid them something for it and got to keep it, and it's just about survived all these years, and I need it for obviously writing, designing the ebook, making and storing the videos, the small amount of editing that I do, and that kind of thing. And it's just now on its last legs. This last 2 weeks it's been shutting off at will, giving me no chance or warning, and I just have to be, it's almost impossible to keep anything on the go without losing the data. But I'm aware of it now, so I'm not doing anything critical on it. But it just meant that in order to do this ebook, I absolutely have to get another computer. And if you know Macs, you know how much they cost. And my MacBook has runs Final Cut Pro, which is about the only bit of video software I can use or want to use. So I have to really get another Mac, otherwise I have to learn a completely different piece of software and go back to square one. And I really don't get, I get lost very quickly on PCs, although I know you can get 3 times the amount of PC for the money. But I'm a slave, I'm already hooked, it's too late, I'm too old to change that bit. So I was kind of thinking, how am I going to do this? It's just come around to do the accounts and time to pay the accountant, which is a pretty expensive undertaking. A bit of work needs doing on the car. It's been a quiet November and December, and I need some more tools and stuff, and I just thought, oh God, perfect timing. And then I saw that, well, Claire told me, she said, what about this government bounce back loan business? And I thought, well, I don't like borrowing. I've done Really Love Guitars without borrowing anything from the bank or anywhere, and I'm very proud of that. But the rates are incredibly low, and it would be the cheapest form of borrowing for around, basically. So I had a look into it today, and while I was looking at it, my computer kept conking out. Then I tried to log into my bank to make an application, because it said apply here for the bounce back loan, government loan, administered by the bank. I guess that's how it's run. So actually, in fact, the bank doesn't even take the risk, the government does. Anyway, so I thought, right, thank God I might be able to get myself a guitar. Guitar. Look at me, a new computer. And so I set about trying to apply, and my computer on cue died a few times in a row. And then I couldn't get in, and I was using slightly outdated login details because the computer lost all its stored things. And next thing you know, I'm on the phone to the bank, waiting 40 minutes at a time, and they're promising me they've cleared all the stops because I tried to log in 3 times with the wrong password. And I finally got it all cleared, apparently, and then I still couldn't get in. But I got in long enough. Oh, that's right, Claire handed me hers, and she said, I've signed in as you to the bank, because we've got joint accounts, obviously. So I went through her computer, and it seemed to allow me to do it miraculously. So I applied for it, and by the end of the day it was approved. So just when I need it, I'm going to be getting a new Mac after 7 years, just at the point where I need a reliable computer to write this next ebook and design it. So I couldn't be more relieved. I think the biggest fear is that I've got all the video that I shot for it stored on a hard disk, and the hard disks aren't 100% reliable even. So on top of everything, I've got an unreliable hard disk, a completely unreliable Mac, and the whole thing threatening to lose all the hard work I've put in over the last few weeks creating this content for the ebook. So I'm sort of very nervous indeed at that point in time. So to know that I can order a new computer, and I don't like borrowing money, but I was thinking, look, when is a better time for Really Love Guitars to do stuff? Is now, a computer it's not an extravagance, it's a crucial business expense and business tool. So I just thought, you know what, I'm going to do it. I can't be sitting around trying to think of how to raise the money. I've just got to get on. I like creating things. I don't want to be kind of putting it off until such and such a day where I can afford another Mac. You know, it's a business. But I just thought, you know what, I haven't borrowed at all in doing this, and I've got 7 years into it. And I think actually that's pretty good going, and I'm grateful for it, and I'm proud of having got that far. Righty-ho. So, lovely cleaned up fingerboard. I mean, this is so much different from what it looked like a minute ago or when it came down. So I'm hoping Dominic will really notice a difference in that, because it's gorgeous compared to what it was. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to mask off all of the frets, and off camera with the radio on and my brain in neutral, I'm going to sand out all of these frets and the fret ends at the same time, and bring them up to a nice shine, polish and shine, and then basically we'll be ready to get the new strings lined up and on, oil the fingerboard, get the new strings on, stretch them out fully, tweak the action if needs be, tweak the nut if needs be, give it overall clean with that stuff you just saw, the naphtha or Coleman's cooking fuel, Coleman's fuel, which is naphtha, as good as, and yeah, we'll be good to go. And I was hoping to get this in the post to Dominic tomorrow. However, I will make a decision at the end of this, not before. I will take it home and have a feel of it, but I'm pretty confident that it's all in good shape. The only reason I'm erring on the side of caution is that, first of all, there's no strict pressure for it to be in, to be sent tomorrow and arrived on Wednesday. And I have to be careful, because I tend to put myself under pressure, and occasionally that doesn't give me the amount of time that I would ideally like, and I'm my own worst enemy in creating this sort of turn it round, keep the customer happier than, you know, even though they don't particularly want it back at that in that speed. So I've had to learn to slow it down. So I should right now, here and now, instead of saying I'm going to go home and send it off tomorrow, I'm going to go home tonight and I'm going to leave this video is running, camera is running. Okie dokie. Everything polished, cleaned and lovely. Time for some oil on the fretboard. Use an old oily rag for this. Polished out, cleaned all over with that stuff, naphtha. So this is just the final stage. I will put the scratch plate on as well. Give that a quick rub down. But here we are, oiling the fingerboard. And after that, we'll string, stretch and intonate, and we'll be complete. Yeah, that's interesting. I think I've learned something out of this one. And I was because I've been talking about this with Ben, another customer, the other night on a one-to-one Zoom session, and he'd been doing some leveling using this method and got to a place he wasn't sure if he was in the right place or not. So we kind of looked at it kind of close up together, and one of the things I felt that was happening was that he was chasing after this fret slap business to a point where it wasn't going to be possible to eradicate it, because it wasn't to do with uneven frets. And the proof was he'd gone quite a long way into flattening the frets down, you know, so they'll take quite a hit in the leveling. And so I think in his case it was appropriate to stop and consider, or question whether that guitar was going to play at that low type of action with that flat a neck profile, and I think we had to kind of accept that it probably wasn't. But on the other hand, tonight's one kind of was looking like, right, that's making fret slap style noises. Now are we in that place where we're gonna have to concede that it's just not gonna, we're not gonna get rid of it by leveling? And in fact, I took the leveling a little bit further. I mean, it was only minor anyway, but and actually the truss rod method scooped out that congestion, whatever it was, beautifully. So I'm kind of gonna have to really focus on this on the next few, because I'm not entirely sure. Well, what I wouldn't have said to him was to carry on attacking the frets that he had already worked on, because they were now, you know, they were quite heavily worn. So I think in his, I think there was a point at which I had to concede that that guitar wasn't going to play at a lower action. But it's kind of interesting because I wondered if we were going to be there with this one tonight, and it turns out we weren't. So I've got to try and, still going to try and figure out the telltale point, if there is such a thing. Mind you, I'm not entirely sure there is a clear way of knowing, and that's where experience with this method really pays off. And more, you know, I'm saying to people, for goodness sakes, don't start this method, don't attack your favorite guitar with it. You know, build up some experience on, you know, spend, you know, 30, 20 quid and buy, you know, an eBay auction special Encore Strat or something, or, you know, get horrible Revelation Strat or something like that nobody wants, and you know, practice on that and get it up to, get your technique up to speed. And I think it's kind of really important to reiterate that. Anyway, right, so just to make life easier, let's get the strings all, sorry, the tuner posts all lined up with the holes in the right place. It does make things a lot simpler, and get all the things pointing upwards so we don't crash into the pegs with the winder. And yes, it is that famous old winder that I've been using since I started. Can't really improve on it. I've got another one somewhere, but oh, what did I just say to myself? Don't tighten up those yet. Put them on, but don't tighten them up. Start with the D and the G. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Looks like I've got possibly another 7-string to ultra-wide 6-string conversions in the offing for a customer. It's kind of exciting. Somebody got in touch with me in the week, or the weekend, I can't remember now. Every day is the same as every other day. And anyway, he was looking for conversion for his huge hands, and he saw a video on YouTube that I'd done of Big Stevie's, and I did too, actually. Oh, it's gone through the same hole. What's going on? Anyway, let's start with this, before I get completely lost in wires. Let's start with this D. Yeah, so that's what we've kind of spent a bit of time emailing and looking at the ideal donor guitar, which ideally has a neck body angle, you know, and ideally already features a Tunematic style bridge, just for the geometry side of it, because the 7 to 6 wide, or 7 to wide 6-string conversions require, they kind of all depend on this shallot bridge, which is great because it allows me to set a particular custom spread on 6 strings, and actually it really makes these wide 6 strings work. But that bridge isn't ideally suited to a 0° neck body angle type guitar, like a Strat style angle. because it really ideally suits something that's already running a Tune-o-matic bridge or similar. So we found a couple of guitars that fit the bill, and one particular one he likes, and it's one of these. It's going to be challenging because it's not cheap, the one he wants, but his take is if he's going to spend money having it converted, and he doesn't want it to be a skimp thing. Oh, and on top of it, this thing has I think it's got EMGs as standard, so we don't have to worry about, you know, the visual lineup of the poles. I'm not quite sure what the magnets look like under the covers of the EMGs, but let's assume that they aren't individual poles. I could be wrong, but either which way, even if they are, then they won't look out of place the way, you know, the way a 6-string spread over 7-pole pickup can look messy. Anyway, so we that could be in the next month or so. It'll be interesting, and it's challenging for me because it will be taking a pretty, I was going to say top of the line, a pretty expensive branded guitar, and pulling out the bridge studs, throwing them away, filling them, re-drilling, putting some new narrower ones in. So I'm kind of looking forward to building up the courage to do that, and to hell with the YouTube criticisms that I may well get. Speaking of YouTube, I had a conversation before Christmas with a company called Airband, who offer rural internet. I think they may be in other places, but certainly in Devon, and they do it via a line of sight technology. I'm not sure quite what technology it is, microwave or some sort. Anyway, so we tried to find out whether we could get, or whether I could get a connection up here, because this workshop is sort of the top of a bit of a hill. And anyway, they didn't come back to me up to Christmas, and I followed them up afterwards. And guess what? Because they couldn't, they checked out the location. I'd sent them a picture and marked it on Google and everything, and they obviously had looked at it. The engineers had said, no, can't get a line of sight, and so they didn't even bother contacting me back. Typical modern fly-by-night chances. Anyway, so I found out in the new year that I couldn't get an internet connection. So I'm hoping, hopefully, I'm going to be still sending I've sent a bunch of videos to Bert in the States, who's going to put them up onto his spare laptop for me like we did before, and I'll dial in from home and use his ridiculously fast broadband speeds to upload from the comfort of his home, which is great. And I'm going to carry on doing it that way as far as I'm concerned. It adds a week or 10 days to to the process, but I really don't care. As long as I got enough coming through, nothing will ever be instantaneous, at least not until one day when they get some sort of fibre connection to here. But what the heck, we are in the countryside, and you pays for your rural idyll, that's what I say. Anyway, so here we are. Let's get these done to rough tuning. Oh, sorry. Okay, I've readjusted this, so I'm going to need to do this again. That's interesting. I'm finding the G on these things is regularly a little bit higher than the others. Well, it could be because it's not tight. It's still a fraction higher. Okay. So this is great. You can do the tiniest adjustments to suit you. So when you're stringing, my recommendation, remember I was talking about perfect tuning stability. We've got the perfect nut in place now. And now we're going for the full stretch. So I'm sort of bedding the strings in first, being very careful with the high strings because I haven't got any spares. I don't wish to break them. Or no nines, I should say. So then I tune up. Then we stretch them between thumb and forefinger. Whoa, that was something going click into place. Stretch between thumb and forefinger. So the pressure is here, not on the nut or the saddle, ideally. But we're getting all of the slack out of there. And if you do this 2 or 3 times, followed by some big bends, I try to limit that a little bit because I don't want to bust the string before it even gets to the customer, because it costs me a set each time, really. There's no realistic chance I'm buying singles. So yeah, so I can't really afford the risk of breaking strings like that. So I sort of have to just lay off it a little bit, but stretch out those strings 2 or 3 times like that until they don't detune any further when you stretch them. And once you've reached that place, you know they're stable. And along with the nut, you'll be able to pick it up and play, and it'll be in tune every time. God, it's light as a feather down here. A little bit of bridge rattle. Now I'm going to go a fraction higher on the nut setting there. Like it. There you go. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, yeah, that's on. I've done up I've tightened up the strap buttons already, checked everything else out, cleaned everything. That's back on. This little hex key goes with the new nut, and the old nut goes back with it too. So hex key attachment goes there. Old nut, which is usable again if you want to revert back to the way it was, goes there. There we have it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going to play tonight, I'm tired. I'm going to go home and shop for new Macs, I think, and see what the budget allows left over for tools. Hey, that's going to be good. You know what I'm thinking of? I'm thinking of thicknesser, planer thicknesser, and table saw. But I don't want a cheap bent topped, aluminium topped table saw. I want something decent. I'll just check the playing action before I put this in the bag. Shouldn't have moved, but it may have slightly moved. No, heavens above. We are 1.2-ish there, and we're on 1 there. I mean, that's minuscule. I'm going to, for the sake of decency, I'm going to raise that slightly. I've lowered it to the, you can go down to 1.2 and 1, but I'm going to just raise it very slightly, because there's no need to go silly, to go to extremes. 1.5 is my normal target. That's bang on there, and 1.2 is there. Spot on. It'll be slightly sharp now, but that's okay. Lovely. I like this guitar. I love these Pelham blue things with a double cream binding. Mwah! Exquisite. I would have one of these in an heartbeat. Love it. Okay, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching. See you soon.